everyone, my name is Julia, super excited to be here, and thanks Matt and Katie for the very nice introduction. I'm here today with Martin, and we have a super fun demo for you guys prepared to learn more about Azure API Center. Before we're actually going to jump into our demo, we do want to make sure everyone is aligned on what Azure API Center is, and in particular what it is for API developers, right? Azure API Center is a product for API admins, but it's also a product for API developers. And we really want to make sure you guys know after the session what benefits it has for you and how it can help and improve your day-to-day life. So let's quickly recap. What is Azure API Center? Azure API Center is a centralized inventory solution, and it helps with your API discovery, API consumption, and API governance. And as I mentioned before, it is a product for API admins, but most importantly, it's also a product for API developers. So from an API developer perspective, what are some of the core challenges we can help you with? Overall, we help with API inventory, we help with API governance, and we also help with API discovery and consumption. Let's talk a little bit more about these different challenges. What about API inventory? Especially nowadays, APIs are everywhere. API sprawl has really become a huge problem. More and more APIs are being developed, more and more APIs are being developed overall. So yeah, there's a huge development in APIs, and more of these APIs are just everywhere in your organization. So it's really hard to get a better grasp on your API ecosystem. So with API Center, we really want to make sure you have this one inventory solution so an API admin, but also API developer can find the right APIs. And most importantly, for Azure API Center, we don't care what API type you have. We don't care what lifecycle stage your APIs are in, and we also don't care where your API is being deployed. This means maybe in the Azure ecosystem, maybe this means cross-cloud. Second of all of this, API governance. So how do we define API governance in API Center? We look at API governance from a design time perspective. So with Azure API Center, we can help you ensure that all of your APIs are following certain guidelines that you might have within your organization. We want to make sure all of these APIs look the same, they're following the right policies, especially this is important from a security and compliance perspective. And then last but not least, API discovery and consumption. As an API developer, you want to reuse as much as possible, right? You don't want to build what might already be out there, in particular of APIs. You want to reuse what's already been built, and there's a huge need in finding the right APIs. So this is where the API discovery and consumption aspect comes in. We want to make you more efficient. We want you to have a better knowledge into your API ecosystem, and this is again where Azure API Center will come in. I think I've talked enough slides, so let's definitely jump into the demo. Just a heads up, I will be talking and showing Azure API Center more from an API admin perspective before I will be handing it over to Martin, my .NET friend, who will be looking at the product from a more developer-focused angle. This is important. We have these two different angles just for you to better understand the admin perspective, to understand the fundamentals, before we can really dig deeper into what Martin will be showing, how you can use the product and make your day-to-day life more efficient. All right, this being said, let's switch over to my demo. Currently, you can see Azure API Center in the Azure portal. We talked about the inventory piece, right? So this is where it really comes in. Azure API Center is your one inventory solution. So right now, you can see 3 different APIs. There are lots of different ways how you can register these APIs. Of course, through the portal, which is kind of boring, lame, right? So we have with Azure API Center, we have CLI support, we have bicep support, we have GitHub Action support. So we really want to make it as easy as possible for our developers to bring in and register all of these different APIs that they are currently building and doing. From an API admin angle, We talked about API sprawl, right? So maybe within your organization, you have multiple different API gateways up and running. You have them in different regions. You might have them in different lifecycle stages. So you have all of these different infrastructure out there. And as an API admin, again, you need this one single place, and you want to combine all of these different information. So this is where our latest integration with Azure API Management comes in. This is where we are using a feature called Link. So with links, you can essentially create a link to an Azure API Management Service instance, to an API gateway. And whenever you create this link, this means whatever information you have on the API management side will be put into your API Center. And as you can see, I already went ahead and did so. This means this is currently syncing. So all of the information I have in my API Management Service instance is also going to be displayed in API Center. So for example, in here, I have an API Management Service. Currently, I have 2 different APIs in here. So let's check out. I created this link. It is set to syncing. There's no error or bug happening. So how does it look like on API Center side? You can see these 2 APIs are now being combined here in my one inventory solution. And because it's linked, you can't delete these APIs because the single source of truth will stay Azure API Management. This is in particular important if, let's say, you have multiple different APIM instances up and running, and you really want to combine all of these informations in one single place. You can use links to gather all of the different information and have your one place to make all of the things happening here. We talked about the single source of truth. So let's see what happens if I delete an API on my API management side. Let's jump onto API Center side. Whenever you change something on API management side, all of these changes will be reflected and all of these things will be reflected in here. So we talked about the inventory angle, right? We talked about having different APIs in API Center. Let's talk about the API governance angle. So in API Center, we have a feature called API analysis. Again, API analysis or API governance in API Center means we're looking at it from a design time perspective. So within your organization, you might have certain rules, you might have certain policies, how your APIs should look like from a design time perspective. So in API Center, I can view the rule sets that I have up and running. I can, of course, also modify and change this. This is where we have an integration into our IDE in VS Code, because it's so much easier to make changes to any kind of code-related things in VS Code. So in Visual Studio Code, we have an API Center extension, and you will find within your API Center a rule set folder where you have direct access to your rules. So you will see the same rules I currently have deployed to API Center. And as an example here, I currently have three defined. One is a naming convention for my version here, so I want them to follow a certain way. I also want to make sure all of my APIs have an operation ID, and then also another naming convention for my operation IDs, which means everything should be in lower snake cases. These rules can be changed, and that's why we have the VS Code extension or the VS Code editing experience in here and redeployed back to API Center. This means you can first locally check and locally test if these rules make sense for your organization before redeploying it back to Azure API Center, and for all of the changes to be affected in here. So whenever you have rules within API Center, you can now check on your inventory and you can make sure that all of these different APIs are following these certain rules or these certain guidelines that you have. So for example here, my Swagger Pet Store API is showing some error and warning messages. Me as an API admin, I would like to learn more about this so I can check out the more detailed report and I can find error and warning messages. I can find all of the different information, why this is happening and where it's happening in my API contracts. So this is the API admin angle, right? Ideally, of course, we want to involve our developers early on as possible, because they are the ones designing, they are the ones building out these APIs. And that's where we'll be handing it over to Martin to show you how you can shift left and involve your developers as early on as possible, and making it a really great collaboration here. So now over to you, Martin.
Hey, thanks, Julia. So yeah, as Julia went through there, we are going to look at pretty much the same examples that Julia went through, but just from a developer example. And we're going to look at some integration with Copilot as well that you can use to really help speed up some of the fixing of some of the analysis rules that might be broken within your APIs, as well as using Copilot to generate OpenAPI spec files that are compliant with your rule set. First of all, just to reiterate, the rule set can be downloaded pretty simply just by expanding out roles and double clicking the rule set. So as you can see on the screen there, exactly the same as what Julia showed, just to show that it syncs between the two. And we can obviously make any changes that we want here. We could also use Copilot as well, incidentally, to generate new rules that we can then copy and paste into here, and then they can be synchronized back just by right-clicking rules and going deploy rules to API Center. And if changes are made from the admin side, as in Julia's use cases, then we can sync any of those local copies, sync any of those local rules back down to a local copy. So first of all, what we're going to do is imagine we're an API developer. We live predominantly within our IDE of choice. You can see the extensions registered here, and we're going to look at the Pet Store API. We're going to look at different versions that are available. We can see version 1. We can also see that we have our default definition, and we're going to right-click and we're going to export the definition document. So very quickly, you can see that we have the definition file open, and straight away there, you will notice some similarities between what Julia showed you on the screen, looking at some of the errors you can see for the version number, and the operation ID is obviously not following snake case, so that is coming up as a problem to fix as well. And just to show you a bit further down, there are other operations that follow the exact same convention. So there's a couple of ways we can fix this from here. You know, we may know exactly what the problem is. So for instance, if I hover over the problem there, we can see it says every API version should follow the following way. So month, day, yeah. So we can literally just change that directly in there if we want to, and you can see that error has also gone. You may have some more complex errors as well, depending on what the problem is. So what you can also do is you can right-click and go to the Copilot plugin, and you can click Fix. And what that will do is it will use the rules that are within the system there, within the rule set, and you can see that it is using a reference, which we can see is our current file that we have open to fix the problem, and it will change the operation ID to match lower snake case, which is list_pets. And you can go through to other ones as well. So let's look at one which is a little more complex, where there are extra underscores in there as well. So we can again right-click Copilot, Fix, and it will attempt to fix the problem. And it has exactly done that for us. We can just have a quick look through. Notice there's another one as well. So again, just right-click and Fix. Generate the edit for us, and we can accept those edits, and that file can then be saved. You can effectively add another version of this directly from the IDE, directly into Azure API Center, and register it from the API, meaning that you don't have to go through the portal experience. As Julia was saying as well, with CLI support and with CI/CD support, for GitHub, you can obviously register and manage those APIs as part of your day-to-day workflow. So we're not adding to the developer's workflow as much as possible. We're basically giving you the ability to integrate this functionality directly into your existing workflows and your existing ways of working. What I want to do now is just collapse these down, and I want to look at the rule set in a lot more detail. And what we're going to do now is we're going to generate a brand new Open API spec file. But with this, we're going to use the rule set that we have defined. So first of all, let's just open the rule set. And you can see we still have the same rules in there as you would expect. And we are going to open the Copilot chat. You'll notice this is using GitHub Copilot for Azure as well. And then within here directly, we can type in a new prompt. So we want to generate me an OpenAPI spec file with a post operation and something with planets. So in this scenario, we don't have an API available here. We're just going to generate a file. You will notice the context is set to the current rule set file. So Copilot is now going off and generating us a brand new specification. You can see this is exactly what it's done. So I can copy the content of that because we will need that in a little while to inspect. Other things to note here as well is the content that is being created also gives us some explanation as to why it is generated, what it is generating. So you will see that it says it defines an Open API specification with a post operation, which is exactly what we asked it to do for a new planet. But it is also telling us that it is adhering to the rules that are mentioned in the rule set, which is the version format, the operation ID must be present, and the operation ID must be in lower snake case. So let's have a closer look at what it has generated just to validate that we are okay with the content. So as you can see, the version works exactly as we would have expected. We didn't specify a date, but you could specify a date into that parameter and it would generate that automatically for you. You could obviously add more operations in. You can see that we have asked it to generate us a post method, and you can see the post method there as well. And you can see the operation ID is indeed there, and it is indeed called create_planet, which aligns to the rules that we have created. So I'm just going to save this file as planets.yaml. And one of the other things you will notice from the Copilot chat is you can register directly in API Center your new API. Now, what it doesn't do at the minute is doesn't take the content and use that to upload your new definition. But what it will do is update, load the extension, sorry. So we can click manual. I will select my API Center service. Within the API title, I will call it Planets API. I will say that it is a REST API. I will copy the version as well. So the 15.12.2024. I'm going to say that this is a development API in the lifecycle, and then the title is just going to be default. And the specification name and file type is OpenAPI. And then I want to select the file. So I can just click planets.yaml, and this will go register the API directly in API Center for me. And just like that, you can see that that is now registered. Let's just close this down so we can focus on the other side of the screen. So now you can see that we can basically go through into here and we can see that our Planets API is indeed now registered after a refresh. We'll just close those files down. You can expand versions. You can see the version exactly as we defined, open up the definition, and just like before, you can generate the document back directly out of the API Center, and you will see the file as before. This time there are no errors, obviously because we generated this against the rule set, so that works really, really well. So there you go. So thanks very much for that. That's all the time I have to show you this from a developer's perspective. So I'm just going to go back to Julia for any questions.
Awesome. Thank you, Martin. Before we're going to jump into questions, let's double check right from the API admin perspective. You just registered an API here. So if we go back into our API Center portal here. First of all, after the beginning and the hiccup here, I just want to confirm, so I did delete the API on API management side. So two things should have changed on API Center side. One is one API should get deleted because it is syncing to my API management instance. And the other one is that Martin just registered a new one, so I should be able to see the new API in here. And I can now see the plugins API, which is not linked. But the other one that is still linked to my API management instance here, you can see this one is here, but only one because I deleted the other one here. Thank you all so much for watching. What are the two things you should really take away from today? First of all, Martin has done an amazing job showcasing our Azure API Center plugin for the GitHub Copilot Azure experience. So with the plugin, you are now able to use conversational or organizational context and really enhance your developer productivity without thinking about API compliance after or governance after. You can now do this while building out these APIs. And the other one is our linking concept. So here are two QR codes for you to check it out more in detail. Always come back to us if you have any feedback or any inspiration. We will definitely be here.